this is the last class, at least, that I'm teaching before a little bit of a break. And I'm definitely going to miss this, this group. I'm going to miss being able to teach for a couple weeks. But I wanted to, in the sort of the spirit of school's out for the winter, I want to do something today that that reminds me of fun times in my own schooling, and that is I want to just work through an ethical problem. The reason that reminds me of good times is because I had this great teacher, one of the great teachers in my life, a guy named Harry Chotner. When I was in high school, he was a history teacher, and he was he was a cool guy. He had been in the film business before, so that was he seemed cool. He was from Hollywood, and he also was a Marxist, which as a high schooler you didn't totally understand. Is that even legal? But seemed cool. But anyway, he taught us history, and he was a very, very good history teacher. Really made an impression on me. And is one of the reasons I think I went into teaching. But one of the great things he would do is every once in a while he would just announce, we would show up to class and announce, close your books, we're doing a moral dilemma today. And that was a big deal. We weren't going to learn the regular topics today. Instead we were going to consider some moral ethical problem in the abstract. He would give us a case, and that was we just were going to do that for the hour. We would just debate it, and it was tremendously it was exhilarating. I think it was a real awakening for me intellectually, to be able to, first of all, it was kind of it was brilliant what he did. We get a day off, but we're still thinking, so our fun framing fun time as thinking through a problem. But I liked it. I liked first of all, the kind of almost the beauty of thought in sort of the abstract consideration of a problem, of a human problem. Here, I'll give you a case and you'll have to sort of think really, you could feel yourself thinking. And then also there was something powerful about, you could do that with a math problem also, but there was something powerful about the idea that whatever we were thinking through, there were real world implications. That actually maybe mattered what we decided on this case. So I have very fond memories of those sorts of discussions. And as it happens, I'm not really pausing our class to do something different. We are going to look at a piece of Mishna today, but I was just as I was moving through the Mishna, we're in Masechet Trumot, I came across a Mishna that reminded me of those days with Harry Chotner. I hope he's well. I think he left school again and went back into the film business. Really remarkable guy. But anyway, we're going to look at a problem today that reminded me of Harry Chotner and also reminded me of a classic version of these ethical dilemmas, which is the trolley problem. So we'll start with that just in a second. Okay, so let's say a blessing to sanctify our learning. This blessing ends la sok b'divrei Torah, to immerse ourselves or to even to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And I was just reading the Maharal last night, who says that the reason we use la'asok b'divrei Torah instead of just lilmod divrei Torah, why don't we just say, thank you, God, for commanding us to learn words of Torah, but no, it's to busy ourselves with words of Torah. And he says, because it's not just about thinking, it's about the activity of discussing, coming together and discussing and being in community. Very much an action, the act of studying Torah, not just the thought of studying Torah. Really a powerful way to frame it, I think. So here we are, fulfilling that by coming together. Let's make a blessing over our Torah study today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so here's the trolley problem. And there are many versions of it, and there are versions of it that exist before it was called the trolley problem in 1976 by a woman who published a paper forget Judith something, who published a paper putting it in exactly this way, but you'll soon see there's lots of ways to formulate the problem. The problem is this: there's a trolley rolling down the track, right? It's a train essentially, but a trolley meaning like a little cab, and it's I think a trolley because it's operating just on its own like charge from the cable, right? Nobody's directing the trolley, and that's fine. But the trolley is moving forward, and you are on the side, and suddenly you see that the track that the trolley is moving on has 5 people standing there, or tied to it, or unaware. Like, it has to be some way in which they can't escape. But there are 5 people on the track that the trolley is heading towards, and it's moving fast, and they're not going to be able to escape. And you see from the side the trolley is going to kill them. Great news, you are standing right next to a lever that will divert the trolley onto track 2, right? So just do that, right? And you'll say, you can't break the trolley, but you can move the trolley onto track 2. Problem is, on track 2, there is one person also tied to the tracks or stuck, or somehow, like, there's one person who will be killed by the trolley if you divert it. So that's the trolley problem. Do you let the trolley keep going and kill the 5 people? Or do you pull the lever, save the 5 people, but then the trolley kills the one person on track 2? So let's just start there. What do you think? What do you do? Do you save the 5 people or not? Always a little hesitant to be the first commentator, and I get it. But all right, let me be provocative then and just say, this is obvious, everybody. It's 5 people to 1. You save 5 people, that's all there is to it. Why are we even talking about this? Correct?
Well,
Jeremy.
If you pull the lever, then you're choosing the fate, right? You're now determining who lives and dies.
That's right. That's right. And that's right. Jeremy is putting his finger on the problem. But otherwise, it really is no problem. If we were just deciding between 5 people and 1 person, I don't know. It seems like an easy 5 are better than 1. But the problem is that there's some question as to whether in participating in the act of saving the 5 people, you are the person who creates the killing of the 1 person. And now we're in a different kind of moral calculus. The 5 and 1 calculus is pretty straightforward from the perspective of what we call utilitarian ethics. Meaning, what is the most good for the most amount of people? Good for people to be alive, better for 5 people to be alive than for 1 person to be alive. That's all there is to it, right? Although even in the utilitarian calculus, this is like a parenthesis, we can start to begin to make the problem. You can imagine how we make a problem complicated by just making the person on the tracks, I was going to say the president, but a really important person, that really matters, that you really like, that everything rests on this person, right? So, like, you make it your mother, right? Like, things start to get complicated once you enter in other factors. But Jeremy points us to the real pressing dilemma here, which is that there's some suggestion that maybe utilitarian ethics say save the 5, but what we would call, there are many names for this, but what I might call deontological ethics, meaning thinking about your duty, you doing your duty and acting in the right way. Well, now you have the option to do nothing and people will die, but maybe that's better than doing something to cause someone to die. So what do you think of that now that Jeremy's made the problem sharper? Anybody want to say they would save the 5 or would not?
But not doing anything is in and of itself a decision.
Good. That's a fair response. There is no, this is a false dichotomy that there's passive and active, and the passive is the, or actually passive and active are terms that work better for Stan's formulation, which is that you are passively killing someone or you are actively, but you are there and you have a choice to make. So the idea that like, oh, but my hand on the lever is some more morally different than my hand off the lever, Stan doesn't buy it necessarily. Others?
I think I would go ahead and save the 5 people, provided all the 6 are equal. I mean, provided that what you said, that the one person is extremely important, does not apply.
But you would save the tell me your name. I can't read it all.
Yeah, my name is Siva Subramanian. I'm from India. I'm not Jewish.
Nice to meet you. Nice to have you here, Siva Subramanian. You said you would save the 5 people, and so you would pull the lever, and you would therefore, not intentionally, but you would kill the one person. Don't you feel bad about that? Why don't you feel bad about killing the one person?
Yes, I would feel bad about that, but in order not to feel guilty, I would not refrain from using that opportunity to save the 5 people. And then even if it means becoming a murderer, I mean, I pull the lever and one person is killed. I don't pull the lever, 5 people are automatically killed. Even if I am to be accused, and even if I am to take some divine punishment for killing that one person, I would still go ahead and pull that lever.
Okay, beautiful.
Because I happen to be there, and there is no reason why I should be there. And if I'm there, it must be for a purpose. And yes.
Okay, excellent. I love the clarity of commitment there. So Siva Subramanian says, I know that it is a terrible thing that I have to do. I in a sense do become a murderer. It's like that. This is it's an ethical dilemma for a reason, which is that they're both bad choices, but ultimately I'm doing some wrong by pulling the lever. But it's worth doing that wrong. It's worth doing that wrong because I'm gonna save 5 people, and the calculus is fairly straightforward. I would love to hear, now that we've had Stan and Siva also seem to indicate that, listen, you got to make a choice, and 5 is greater than 1. Would anyone refrain from pulling the lever? Is anyone willing to stand up for? I just don't want to be implicated. Or I think I saw Sophia raise her hand. Did I?
Yeah. I mean, I think that so what you're doing by pulling the lever is you're saying that the one person is less valuable than the 5 people. And so like maybe that is disrespectful to that one person. I mean, so you're comparing people to people. So that's good. But even to say that one person is less valuable than the other 5 people is wrong in some way. And so it's not that you're choosing not to save the 5 people, but by doing the status quo, you're not devaluing anyone's life.
Great. I'm going to put it somewhat. I think you put it elegantly. I'm going to put it in a different way that I think is a part of the reckoning that you're offering us, which is, how exactly do you determine that 5 people are worth more than 1 person? What is the unit of measurement there? Is every life worth the exact same amount? Is it like this is utilitarian ethics seem very straightforward until we start asking the question, well, how do you measure the most good for the most people? And what does that mean? And what if these 5 people are having miserable lives? They're not enjoying their lives, and the one person, there's so many. But Sophia puts it more bluntly and more powerfully, which is, how can you be the person who decides, I have evaluated from the outside that this is worth it, and these are the people that you just like, and you can't play God, right? In that way. How do you make such a reckoning? All right, let's take one more thought, and then I'm gonna start looking at some text. Payam?
Yeah, I mean, I would make the deterministic argument that I'm not God, I'm not omnipotent. What's supposed to happen in the universe is what's supposed to happen. And I mean, you can take it further by saying if you intervene in the course of things, you might make things worse.
I like that. In other words, part of what Payam is doing here is he is pointing out that there is a world in motion and all kinds of factors that are already spinning in the world, and think like that. That is true. Your decision that you will now become the manipulator of the moment, like there is, in other words, a way of saying that the world has its own logic, and there are many ways of saying that. You might say this is as God intended, or you might say this is a terrible situation which fate has placed before all these people, and there is a disaster either way. But I'm not going to be the one who comes in and says, I now determine what the way the world should go. Who knows? Who knows? And since I can't know the way the world should go, I refrain. Okay, so let's now take a look at, let's begin to get into, so now you have a sense of what the trolley problem is. And there are many versions. I'll give you just one other example. One of the classic alterations to the trolley problem is the fat man version. And in the fat man version, you're standing on a bridge with a fat man, and you see the trolley is coming for these 5 people. And you're on the bridge, but you realize if you push the fat man over the bridge, he's so girthy that he will stop the train. Right? And so you shove him down, he falls onto the, oh, what are you doing? He was your best friend. And you shoved him down, and the train stops, and the 5 people are saved. Now, would you do that? Right? And I just ask you to consider, if you would have saved the 5 people by pulling the lever, would you still save the 5 people by pushing the fat man off the bridge? And if not, why not? Right? And you can see how things start to get a little tricky. Is there actually a moral difference between you actively murdering someone in order to save 5 other people and you passively ending up causing the death of someone in order to save 5 people? Okay. So now I have to admit, these questions, one of the problems with these questions is that it feels almost like they're not answerable. You're just like sort of playing with ideas. But they do force us to really ask ourselves, what is right action? What are my duties in the world? How do I participate in difficult situations where there are there are 2 moral choices that are in conflict, right? Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look now at a trolley problem of a sort as it appears in rabbinic literature. And I just moved through the order of the Mishna, and I stop whenever I come to one that I think is particularly important for us to look at. And sometimes that's because hold on a second, I'm just kidding. Sometimes that's because it's a critical piece of law. But sometimes, and you've seen this now come up many times before, sometimes what we're doing is moving through the corpus of rabbinic conversation, the record of their thinking about all manner of life's problems, and so things come up along the way. Okay, here is the source sheet. Okay, there you go. There's a source sheet, and now I'm going to share that same source sheet. Now, okay, in order to get into this, because we are in the Mishna, the rabbinic code, like 3rd century rabbinic code, because we're there, like philosophical problems are not simply like pondered and presented as such. We get to them kind of along the way by in the middle of very particularistic, rarefied legal conversation. So in order to get where we're going today, we're going to have to bury our nose for a little bit in very fine details, that it will be important to understand how we get to our real problems. But don't worry if you don't catch all of this, because you won't need to remember it. Eventually we'll have moved past it. But here is the problem. Oh, and I do also want to say, in the spirit of what they call trigger warnings these days, that that we're going to end up looking at cases of the most heinous crimes, rape and murder. So if those are traumatizing subjects for you, just be aware at a certain point it'll look like we're in very kind of like minutia, and then suddenly we'll be talking about very, very serious and horrifying things. Okay, so let's take now a look at minutia. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can. Okay, so we're in Mishna Trumot, which discusses the donations, the truma that one gives to the priests. That is, there's a tithe from all of your produce that you set aside for the priests, because the priests don't farm land, they work in the temple. And what's important for you to know, and as I said, we're gonna need a lot of kind of nitty-gritty information, but eventually that's only going to be a transition. But what's important for you to know at this moment is that truma has to be it's designated for the priests, which means you can't eat it, only a priest can eat it, or a priestly family, someone in a priestly family. And it has to be eaten in a state of purity. That's going to be important. The food has to be pure, and there are certain ways that food can become contaminated. One of them is by handling it, and so that'll become relevant. But also the person eating it has to be pure. But for our purposes, more importantly, the food has to be kept pure if the priests are going to be able to use it. Okay? And so you have a kind of responsibility not to deliberately contaminate or impurify or defile, is a word we'll use eventually, this food. Okay, here's the case in question, and it's actually the second case in a row. I'm actually using the second case because, as complicated as this is, the first case was even more complicated because it had to do with wine and the mechanisms for making wine. This is a little simpler because it's a jar of oil. Okay, so chavit shel shemen shenishpacha. So a little jar of oil, and it's pure. It's a jar of oil that's been designated for the priest, and it's in a state of purity, but it spills. Okay, so both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua agree that if one can save at least a quarter log in purity, one should save it. Now, what does that mean? A quarter log, there are about 6 egg volume sizes in a log. So we're talking about an egg and a half's worth of oil, right? And if you can save an egg and a half's worth of oil, this amount of oil, then you should save it. Now, what does that mean that you should save it? Here, maybe I'll come back to you as I'm explaining these complicated things. What does that mean that you should save it? It means if the oil spills and you reach out your hands, well, you make the oil impure. I mean, you can use it for non-pure purposes, but you've ruined the oil for the sake of its being truma, for the sake of its being for the priests. So you can't just cup it, and you can't actually just grab something to like a leaf or even a bowl nearby to hold it. You have to have a pure vessel to catch the oil so that the oil remains pure. So the calculation that both rabbis here agree on is that if you can save an egg and a half's worth of oil by running to get a pure vessel, then you should go and get that pure vessel and come back, even though in the process you're losing a lot of oil. Imagine a gallon of oil spills and you're thinking, well, I think some of this I can save and I can keep pure. So you go and get the vessel and you bring it and you save that amount. That's if you can save that amount. Now the question is, what if you can't? What if there are no pure vessels around? I mean, it's a very sort of strange situation. You just happen to be able to save an egg and a half. So what happens if oil spills and it is pure, and you I'm seeing people like kind of get up during this, and I'm like, oh yeah, we're deep in the weeds here, folks. But believe me, we're heading towards something much more relevant. So if you can't save an egg and a half's worth of oil, then there are two opinions. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, in some ways, is the one that really that we're really concerned with, because Rabbi Eliezer says if you can't save that amount, let it flow down and be swallowed up by the ground, but let one not make it impure with one's own hands. Okay? So Rabbi Eliezer says, instead of saving any of the oil, even though you can't save any of it like in a state of purity, but you could save it and use it for more basic purposes. But he says, it's wrong to deliberately make pure oil impure, and so you shouldn't even touch it. Just let it go, because it is going to become impure when it hits the ground, but you shouldn't be the one to make it impure. Okay. Okay, so you can see here how there is, although we're in like a case, I mean, who cares, right? What are we talking about? But you can start to see where something relevant to our earlier ethical discussion is coming to the fore, which is that Rabbi Eliezer is saying you should not be the person who does something wrong. You should not be deliberately causing impurity. Now, even as I say does something wrong, I'm not even sure we're in a moral dilemma. Maybe we are in the sense that we're competing between values like purity versus, I don't know, like wastefulness, or purity versus thrift or economy or resourcefulness. Like those are the values in tension, but just like, okay, I guess we're seeing how much purity matters to Rabbi Eliezer. But for our purposes, more than that, we can start to see that Rabbi Eliezer has a principle in mind, which is you don't be the one who causes the harm or causes the damage. Okay. Then there's Rabbi Yoshua. Now remember, they agreed if you could save some, you should actually go to the trouble of saving some. But if you can't, Rabbi Yoshua says, and he's talking about this case and the more complicated one that I left out. In this case and in the previous one, Rabbi Yoshua said, this is not the kind of truma that I'm warned not to make impure, but simply not to eat it. Okay. This is also very, very complicated. This is the last very complicated thing that I will, this is the last sort of like really like crunchy detail that you'll have to process. And then we're going to get into more exciting stuff. But what Rabbi Yoshua is saying is we have a rule. We have a rule. And the rule is if something is like food, like a plate of food, edible food, then and it's ready for the priest to eat, a piece of truma, like imagine truma fruit and bread and meat, and a piece of truma for the priests, and it's ready to eat. You can't make it impure because then the priest won't be able to eat it. However, that applies to edible food. It doesn't apply to stock food like a vat of oil. The warning of like not contaminating a priest's food is a warning that was given to food that's like stay out of the priest's kitchen, because you'll muck it up and then the priest won't be able to eat. But we didn't say stay out of the priest's pantry. So Rabbi Yoshua is saying, listen, oil doesn't have this like don't dare touch it cautionary around it. So you should be able to save oil. And if you can't, of course, I agree that if you can save some for the priest, you should. But if you can't, save some anyway, because then we'll be able to use the oil. Okay? Now, I apologize to you. We're like halfway through our class and you're like, why are we, Rabbi Kasher, please, is this how I elected to spend my Monday afternoon? Okay, but now things get interesting. Because remember what I said. I said, if the food is edible, if it's been designated for the priest and it's edible, then you're not allowed, you have to be very careful not to contaminate it, not to make it impure, because then it's as if you're stealing food from the priests, right? Or if you are a priest, you're ruining your own food. You can't do that. Okay, but what is that case? How does that play out? And the Mishna asks, well, what is that case? And then gives us a very interesting scenario that I think begins to take us down down the alley of a rabbinic trolley problem. So here's the problem. So for what kind of truma are we warned not to make it impure? Well, suppose one was traveling from place to place carrying loaves of truma. In other words, you're the guy who delivers bread to the priests, right? Or I don't know, you're delivering bread to your family. Maybe you are a priest, or you're just like doing a favor for somebody. You have truma loaves in your bag. And a foreigner, somebody comes to you on the road, and distinctly someone who's not Jewish, not part of your tribe, a nochri. A foreigner comes and says to you, give me one of these and I will defile it. And if you don't, I will defile them all. Now, the word here is yitame, I will make it impure, but I'm keeping the translation of defile because it'll soon become relevant in a different context. But the idea is that the bandit is like, aha, you give me one of the, and this is like one of these rabbinic scenarios where you imagine that the bandit has halachic knowledge, knows the intricacies of Jewish law, but fine, actually in this case, maybe a bandit would be wise to know it because the bandit would know, oh, these weird like rabbinic Jews, they care so much about purity. I can threaten to anything I touch, they will be lost to them. So I want to get some food. And I'm saying, give me one of those loaves and I'll let you pass. But if not, I'm going to just put my hands all over everything and thereby ruin all the loaves. Okay, okay, we're still not really in a moral dilemma, but it's a bit of a dilemma. What do? Do you give the bandit the loaf? Or do you let the bandit say no and let the bandit touch all the loaves? Now, it seems like it's pretty straightforward. Just give him a loaf. Otherwise, he's going to ruin everything. But what would Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer, I think you can predict, would say, do not give them. Rabbi Eliezer says, let him defile them all, but do not deliberately give him one to defile. Okay, so now this is a radical, that you see his position really, like he's committed. If someone says, I'm going to ruin all these loaves, let them, but don't you be the person that ruins all the loaves, right? Okay, I'm going to open this back up soon, but there you see the problem playing out. And the principle is, don't you be a person who causes the problem. Now, Rabbi Yoshua, remember, said, save the oil. So will he say, save the loaves? Well, he says actually a very strange thing, and it's an interesting moment in the rabbinic trolley problem. So let's take a moment to consider this before we get into our more serious cases. But Rabbi Yoshua says, Yaniach lefanav achat mehem ala sela. He should take one of the loaves and put them on a rock. So that presumably, he says, okay, you want a loaf? Here is one right here. Why? Because you won't be the person causing the loaf to become impure. And I guess you don't do it with your own hands. You place it out of the bag, out of its pure container, put it on the rock, and then the foreigner comes over and takes it. Okay, so what's the value of the rock? Does it help at all? Let me put it this way. What makes sense to you? Someone comes along and says, I'm going to take that loaf, and if you don't, I'm going to ruin all the rest. What's the right thing to do there? Right? I have to say, even as I ask the question, I feel like, what do I actually expect you all to answer? I mean, like, I don't know, the right thing to do, like, I don't care whether I make all the loaves pure. It's like, okay, I get the rabbinic logic, and I get that Rabbi Eliezer is committed to you not being the person that does it, but we're really just playing with just playing with abstractions here, okay? So this is where we're at, and we're soon going to head into a very serious problem, but just like, we got there from a place of kind of almost abstract religion, how many angels on the head of a pin kind of reckoning. Like what really matters here? All right, but Payam does have a possible answer for us. Payam?
I mean, purity doesn't exist in a vacuum. This is part of a whole halachic system based on faith and everything else. You know, it's not like this is just a piece of bread and it's not going to become pure or not. It's almost a test to see. And if you become impure, then you're almost breaking the whole chain of the halachic system.
Right.
You know, it's like it's a lot more complicated than this piece of bread that becomes or not. It's your moral choice of this believing in the entirety of the system. I don't think it's you making something impure versus you not. It's believing, you know, and then like if you're willing to sacrifice something, then the whole system sort of crumbles on itself.
Yeah. Thanks you so much for that, Payam. First of all, you make a very important and sort of like wide-reaching point that this is, you know, these laws are all meaningful to the rabbis. So though some of them may seem more immediately applicable to us, it's really like, and especially in some ways when questions of purity, which are so mysterious and abstract, you know, it's really a test of like, are you committed to this system? Will you live out the values of this system? Now, I want to add to that actually, I think, provides an important way to frame this transition that we're about to see, because we're about to see a transition that you might almost find offensive because we're moving from like loaves of bread to cases of rape. And you might feel like, whoa, even the very sort of like move from the minutia to the worst, the most heinous crimes feel like, where's the thread and where's the thoughtfulness? Too much. But actually, I think that the thread is that Payam is suggesting for us is that, you know, there's a principle at stake here. And the principle is that you not be the one to do the harm, you not be the one to break the moral truth, whether it be purity or in this case, something much more serious. But having said that, what we're going to get in the rabbinic trolley problem is right away we're going to get an answer, right? So far we've seen debates, but on the following question, there is no debate. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua agree, and I wonder if you do too. Okay, so again, very heinous crime situation coming up. So too, right, as if to use the same logic, if a group of foreigners say to a group of women, presumably Jewish women, give us one of you so that we may defile her. And here's why I kept the language, because technically, again, it's make her impure, but it's clear the implication is rape. So give us one of you so that we may defile her, and if not, we will defile you all. So essentially, we're going to rape one of you, make a choice, hand her over, and if not, we're going to rape all of you. And you know, if this case seems outlandish to you, I think you need only take a few moments to think about the torture that Jews and many other people, but certainly Jews, have experienced throughout history, to know that scenarios like this probably have come up in some version or another. Difficult choices like this. And here's the answer. The rabbis have an answer. Then let them all be defiled rather than hand over to them one soul from Israel. Nefesh echad miYisrael. So we're going to play out this one more way with a last case, but this I think is where the cases get very serious, and there's a real moral dilemma, and the rabbis seem actually pretty clear. So I wonder what you think. If there's a group here of women and these bandits or attackers come and say, hand one over, the answer is no, we will not. And you do what you will, but we're not going to select someone and give her over to you. What do you think? You know, is that a bad, you know, for those of you who would have saved the 5 over what, like, what is that? Do you understand where the rabbis are coming from here? So I open it up to the group. This is really a moral dilemma. David, did you have a thought? Unmute yourself, would you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
let me just suggest what unifies the three positions from Eleazar's perspective, which is I would characterize the point of view as intentional or mindful passivity or muscular passivity. That's how I experience all three of these postures. There is a strong point of view, and it's approached with great mindfulness and intentionality.
Okay, great. So
it feels passive, but it's not.
Good, and this picks up on Stan's comments earlier that there's no such thing as not choosing. When the decision is before you, you now have real choices, and here the choices are not between saving all the women or not. The choices are between doing harm to one person actively or doing harm to all these women passively, right? And both of those are real choices. Ken, you have a thought? And then I'll go to Rosa.
Yeah, this reminds me of the counterexample in the Torah of when the strangers come to Lot's house and the townsfolk demand that the strangers be turned over to them, presumably for defilement. And Lot, I believe, if my memory is correct, hands over one of his daughters.
Right, that's right.
So this is the flip side of it, and the rabbis must have had that in mind.
Good. So that's a helpful. That outrageous story is helpful because it gives us an alternative where you are you're choosing who should receive the harm. You're making choices, the kind of choices that Sophia said earlier were sort of impossible. And the rabbis seem to be coming down on the other side and say, on Sophia's side really, and saying, how can you ever decide that this is the person who should suffer? But I might say the moral position differently. I might just say, don't you be the person who decides. If they're threatening this kind of violence against like the entire group, that's their choice and it's a horrific one, but don't get into it. Don't implicate yourself by actively saying, we choose this person. Rosa.
Okay, so in the case of the women, it's a group of women. So for them to choose somebody is horrific. Rather, they should be part of the group is a lot more acceptable, I think.
Because it's them. Rosa's saying that there's a certain moral charge here because the group is all under threat and the group somehow decides to extract one of themselves to save the rest of themselves. So that's different than someone standing outside as an observer. And that's a really interesting, from the perspective of ethics here, that's a really interesting question. If someone was standing outside of this scenario, could they choose differently? But who knows? But Rosa says part of the problem here is the group saving itself by giving up one of their own. Okay, that's interesting. Bob.
Yeah, I wonder if the rabbis would have a different view if in this case with the women, if one of them volunteered to be the person who would be raped. So then you're making a choice about yourself, but you're not making a choice about other people.
Good. That's a very important question, and let's see here. The language here, I think, will be especially helpful to us. The language of al yimesru lahem nefesh echad miYisrael. Don't hand over to them. That's yimesru, to turn over. And it does seem like there's a terrible outcome here for sure. But the crime is that you were the one who gave them over. Right? You actively turned them over. And that's That's part of the problem. Joe Schwartz.
One other difference between the trolley dilemma and this rabbinical dilemma with the women is also, can you take these supposedly obviously bad people who intend to commit rape at their word? How do you know they're not going to rape all the women anyway?
Right.
The trolley, you know exactly it's going to do one or the other. You know it's not going to do both. But the bandits might do both. Same with the bread, for that matter.
Very good, Joe, because you bring up another kind of ethical paradigm that we might use, that we actually do use in modern geopolitics, which is don't negotiate with terrorists. And it's not just don't negotiate with terrorists because like, I don't deign to speak to those lowlifes, but because exactly what Joe says, once you're negotiating here, I mean, the problem seems to treat it as if you can determine the two outcomes. But part of what Joe says is the reason you don't want to get into this is like, these are like, you don't start saying, oh, well, okay, rapists, I take you at your words, right? All right, that's I think it's a way out of the problem, but I think it's a legitimate and an ethically well-founded response to the problem. Sivan?
I think the emphasis here is the word soul. When you hand over one person, you hand over a soul to the bandits. Whereas if you stay together and refuse to be handed over or refuse to negotiate, you retain your soul, and they might defile your body and not get anywhere near your soul. When you hand over one person, you hand over that person's soul, and the remaining 4 persons, they also lose their soul, or they defile their own soul in giving away the one person. So this is one spiritual thinking that occurred to me. The other practical aspect is how do you trust a person, a group of bandits, when they say that, okay, you give me one of your women and we will not harm the rest of them.
Right.
They might take that one person and still go ahead and harm the other 4 people. So the logic of not negotiating with terrorists or very bad people comes into play.
Okay,
how do you trust?
So good. So that another vote for don't negotiate with terrorists. But Sivan also points out that there's something very kind of resonant, deeply resonant about the phrasing here of not handing over to them one soul from Israel, nefesh achat miYisrael. And in Hebrew, that language is like, it both means like a life, but also has the connotations of like the spiritual being. Like this is a person, and they're one of the ways of talking about the ethical choices here is that every person has dignity. Every person has infinite dignity. And in fact, that very language that Sivan is pointing out, nefesh achat miYisrael, we know it most famously from another Mishna in Sanhedrin, which says, whoever kills someone, whoever causes the loss of nefesh achat miYisrael, whoever causes one soul to be lost from Israel, it's as if they destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves nefesh achat miYisrael, whoever saves one soul from Israel, it's as if they've saved an entire world. So there is a different kind of ethical paradigm here, which I think Sivan is picking up on, which is that you cannot ever violate the dignity of one person actively. And there are all kinds of moral choices that you might make here, but you cannot violate actively say this soul doesn't matter. This person doesn't matter. No, that person is an entire world. You can't make that choice. Okay, so that's a very strong position. With that phrase in mind, I want to take us to a parallel case, and you'll not be surprised to find that the rabbis here in the Jerusalem Talmud, because of we're in the agricultural section of the Mishnah, there's no Babylonian Talmud, so we're going to the Jerusalem Talmud, and you'll see that same language of nefesh achat miYisrael, one soul from Israel. But here, we're going to talk about a similar scenario where people are threatening to kill people instead of to rape them. It is taught a bunch of people in caravans were on journey when they ran into a gang of Gentiles, this time the word is goyim, who said, and just like as these cases come up, like let's think about like what world the rabbis are living in, that they really fear that on every journey they may be threatened in this way. And the Gentiles say, give us one of your groups so that we may kill him, otherwise we will kill all of you. What's the answer? Even if the entire group will be killed, it's forbidden to give up a single Jew to be killed. Nefesh echad in Israel, same thing. Okay, so you shouldn't be surprised there. But what is surprising is a little bit of a caveat, a clause. They say, if they demand a specific person by name, however, such as Sheva ben Bichri, then they give up that person and are not killed. Okay, did you get that? If they say, give us this person, we're here for that person. We're not asking you to make a choice, which one of you will you hand over? We're here, we've been chasing this group so that we could go get Sheva ben Bichri. And Sheva ben Bichri is a case they use because, and you'll see in your last source, I won't show it now, this actually, Ma'aseh Shahaya, this actually was true that Sheva ben Bichri was someone that was, in the days of King David, pursued, and the commander Yoav was asked to turn over Sheva ben Bichri because he was a wanted man. And then, and I'm gonna turn it back over to you, but there's yet another kind of clarification or qualification, which is that there's a debate. Shimon ben Lakish says, well, this only applies if the person specified had a death penalty on him, like Sheva ben Bichri. So that person actually was wanted by the law. If someone comes to you and says, that we're here for that person, they're wanted, we're gonna kill them, you can hand them over. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even if he doesn't have the death penalty upon him, they give the specified individual up. Now that's an interesting position, two positions here. One is, if this person is accused of a crime, has been sentenced, and now they're just pursuing this person, you can hand them over, notwithstanding the general principle that we don't ever hand anyone over. And Rabbi Yochanan, and I think this is an important little nuance here, twist, he says, no, they don't have to have the death penalty assigned to them. They just have to be named by the group. The group has to say, we want that one. We want Yankel. Because if they say that, presumably, I don't know, what's the difference there? What's the difference there? And does this make any sense to you, this big exception? We've been talking about the case of not giving anyone up, not giving anyone up to be raped, not giving anyone up to be killed, but now you can give someone up if they're accused of the death of, they've been sentenced to death already, or, says another opinion, if they just are pointed out by the other group. Okay? Lots on the table now, and we're running out of time. But here you see the rabbinic trolley problem now complicated in all kinds of ways. And I want to say that the rabbinic trolley problem is one way to put it. Another reference point is this movie, Sophie's Choice, where that tells the story of a woman who was asked by the Nazis to decide which of her children would live and which would die, right? And that's another reference point, and it's important because a lot of the cases we're dealing with, and part of the charge of the cases, is that we're not standing on the side just pulling a lever. We are making choices actively about people that we're going to have to name. And what Rabbi Yochanan says is, as long as you're not doing the picking or the naming, as long as you don't have to pick, oh, this child's going to be killed and this child's going to be saved, then you can let this, you can go ahead and sacrifice one for the good of the whole. But if you had to do the active work of saying, yeah, we'll take Yankel, go ahead, kill Yankel, then that wouldn't work. Okay, so okay, I sometimes reach a point where I don't have a question. You now have all the information. What do you think? Let's hear from Rosa again, then we'll hear from Alan.
Okay, so I think in this case, the out that the rabbis took, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think the out that the rabbis took is they could be going to the law of the land. If somebody comes along and asks for Yankala, whether Yankala is guilty or not, It's not their problem to determine if Yankala is guilty or not. They're not the court. So therefore, all they can do is assume that Yankala really did something, and that's why he's being taken out, whether he's going to be killed or tried or whatever. It's not their concern anymore. As I said, I don't necessarily agree with it. However, I can understand why, to my mind, that is why that particular ruling is there.
Okay, I really appreciate that, right? If we have in our ethical system some principle in play, which we've been considering, that every person has kind of infinite dignity and you cannot decide that a person is the one who ought to be sacrificed here, perhaps you can offset that by saying, well, we do follow the laws of the land, and the laws of the laws of the land have named this person as deserving of this. Now, as Rosa said, I don't know, do we agree with the law? Is that person really guilty? But whatever it is, the active choice of saying we kill this person has been in some formal way taken away from us, and that is a kind of an out. Alan, what do you think?
Okay, first off, I'm a retired physician, and I went from Jewish medical ethics conferences. And the first example I'm going to give you was from Rabbi Sachs, the head rabbi of England, who gave a lecture. And he said, if you're a doctor and you can only do one operation, and you go into a room that has 6 people that have the disease, that they're going to die if you don't do it, you take the first person who qualifies for the operation that you come to. You don't go and check the others out. You just take the first person to eliminate the dilemma, that you avoid the dilemma by just taking the first one. So my question is in this, and then I have another example. My question is in this, the first one you're aware of, if you're aware of the 5 first, or you're aware of the 1 first, does that, using Rabbi Sachs's methodology, does that force you to make the choice for the 5 or the 1? The second thing is,
can I interrupt you for a second, and I'll turn back to you? But this is it's really helpful the way you're framing it, because we need only think about what's going on in the world around us with vaccines being distributed across the country. We have to make some decision about who's going to get them first, and in making those decisions, some people are going to die because they didn't have the vaccine, right? Now,
exactly.
We're trying to use reasonable, logical, utilitarian, right? Who really deserves this? Who's more out in the front line? Who will it save more lives to give it? Who's more vulnerable? All of these things make sense to me. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I for sure want my mother to get the vaccine well before I do. But it's choices, and it's like these are. You can't really say, oh, well, these people should be saved first. You don't really know that, right? So there's a dilemma there. And in some ways, having the rules, the qualifications, this person is next on the list, actually, in some ways that helps. That does the same thing that Rosa was saying that the law does for us. Alan, you were gonna.
I've actually worked with the Israeli army, and I've done training with them, and the head rabbis, and I don't know which one, of Israel have basically said that traditional Western triage is okay. So Western triage is where you look at the entire field of all of the injured people, and you break people down into 3 groups. Those that are going to survive whether you do anything or not, those that are going to die whether you do anything or not, and those that, if you do something, have a chance. And so it's halachic, they basically determine to ignore the ones that are going to die anyway. And I don't know how that would apply, how you would apply that to this. By the way, I want to thank you. This is my first time joining you, and I'm enjoying this very much.
Welcome. Really good to have you here. Where are you, Alan?
I'm in Des Moines, Iowa.
So good to have you with us. Thanks. Yeah, right. So there you go. I mean, there's another way of thinking about how to make the choices, which ultimately are life and death choices, in ways that feel like you can live with them. Like, these people are going to die anyway. These people are going to survive anyway. Like, there are cases where you can begin to come up with factors of prioritization, right? And what's challenging about these cases is some of them don't have those factors. The case of the women, there was no reason to pick one or the other, right? The case of the caravan, there was no reason. And now, oh, maybe there's a Sheva ben Bichri here. There is a reason, you know? Okay, I want to take one more comment and then show you one last move in the text, and then we'll close for the day. Leah?
Hi. So I've heard of the trolley scenario before, but the last thing you've been talking about, where it's calling out someone by name that you would that they want to have, I liked it just because I'm like, you don't have to worry about thinking about it. You just kind of like hand them over. You're not involved with it. But also the death penalty part, I thought was interesting too, because I feel like it's their fate anyway. So you're not like, maybe you're making it happen a little bit sooner, but you're once again not involved with any of the decision making. I mean, yes, you are handing somebody over, but to me, it feels like I don't feel so guilty about it. I'm like, okay, it's not, you know, it's like it changes for me the factors in my head, so I can kind of be okay with it, basically.
That's good. Yeah, I love the way you're putting it, and it also helps us to see the connection to Alan's comment just now, right? You have this person's going to die anyway. So everybody else, you're gonna like let everybody else die. I mean, at a certain point, it's only right to, and these are very difficult things. What do we say about a vaccine for someone who's, you know, got a different disease? Like, is their life less worthwhile? I mean, these suddenly you get into very murky choices. And sometimes it feels obvious and sometimes not so much. Okay, on our way out, I want to show you one last spin on this question of the person who's been named and another rabbi who is looking for a way, after all, let's have some sympathy, to save the larger group. Let's take a look, and then we're going to have an appearance from a special visitor. Here's another example. Ula bar Koshev was wanted by the presumably Roman kingdom. So Ula's wanted. He fled and went to look, and as Rosa said earlier, who knows? That doesn't mean that the Jews thought he was guilty. Who knows what people are being accused of by the Roman kingdom? But he was wanted. He fled and went to Lod, to Yeshua ben Levi's. They came and surrounded the city, and they said, if you don't give him to us, we'll destroy the city. So the whole city. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi went to Ula and persuaded him. The language here is v'paisei, like calmed him down. Like he's hysterical. He's like, listen, you're just going to have to do it. They're after you. There's no choice. Yeshua ben Levi actually talked him into it and then gave him up to the Roman authorities. Okay, so there's an example of this principle playing out. The principle, after all, that Reb Shimon bar Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan would actually agree on, right? Ula has been specified as wanted. Okay, but then Elijah, may he be remembered for good, Elijah the prophet, who would appear to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and teach him things, suddenly stopped appearing to him. So he made the choice to persuade this guy, gave him over to the Romans, and Elijah stopped appearing to him in nightly visions, right? Like, you've done something wrong. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi fasted several fasts, a way of sort of self-punishment in order to regain enlightenment. And Elijah appeared and said, and this is really an amazing line, oh, so now I appear before informers, right? Lemosrotani nigla, right? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi responded, didn't I do according to rabbinic teaching? But we have a teaching that I followed the rules. I didn't just sacrifice it. We have a principle here in play. And Elijah said, and was that teaching for the pious? Mishnat Chasidim? In other words, Elijah is saying, yeah, you're right. You're right. We have a teaching. We have a way of getting out of this. And there is a clause that if someone's named and you can hand them over, and you made the correct decision according to that reckoning. But and this is such an interesting language, but a really pious person wouldn't follow that teaching. And what does that even mean? A chassid, someone who's extremely scrupulous about religiosity or holiness or the law, that person wouldn't have even with the out of having someone named, would never have given anyone up, because it's always, as Elijah said, I don't appear to informers. Now, I want to just leave us thinking about this. We're over time anyway, but it's a fascinating place to leave the discussion, I think, because on the one hand, there is look, the rabbinic position is when it comes to human life, when it comes to oil, there's a debate. When it comes to human lives or violence, we don't ever deliberately subject someone to that. But let's be reasonable. If there are circumstances where we have to triage, we will triage. But there is a voice in the tradition that says, and the voice is now put in the mouth of Elijah, that says, no, even if you have a good reason, don't ever become someone who's deciding on who lives and dies. Don't get into that business, right? And that's an interesting place to end, because I think it's actually right that that's a pious way of looking at it. Like a practical, a utilitarian, but just like a basic moral, we make tough choices. That orientation will have us saying, look, sometimes we have to sacrifice, right? But there's a different way of looking at it, which is a kind of piety, a kind of non-rational religious commitment, which is just like, no, we will never, ever be actively involved in any kind of harm to another person. And that's interesting because it's not utilitarian. There's something a little abstract. We've been trading in abstractions all along, but there's something a little abstract or spiritual about the idea that, yeah, even damn the consequences, I'm gonna do what's right. I'm gonna do what's holy. Yeah, there are ways I could figure out how to get around this, but I'm never gonna participate in any act of violence or indecency. And that's in some ways a hard pill to swallow, but I think we do have those abstract principles in our tradition. And some of them are abstract in the ways that purity and holiness are abstract, like spiritual principles we don't fully understand, but some of them are abstract like loyalty or dignity. These principles that we do really have a relationship to, even though they're not tangible, they're so real to us. So let's leave contemplating those principles. And it's been just a pleasure learning with you this semester. We're going to take 1 week off next week, and we'll pick up again first Monday of January. Thanks for a fascinating discussion, everybody. I hope everybody has some time off and figures out some way to use it during this crazy season that we're in. So love you all. Thanks for learning today. Appreciate it.